All right, let's see. Let me just make sure I'm live here and sending to the correct place. All right. Okay, here we are. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Happy Sunday. Hope everyone's doing well and hope you're happy and safe and healthy wherever you are in the world today. And I want to thank you for joining me in this session. I'm honored to be with you here again, here in our 49th week of this Sacred Space series. Started originally to offer, I guess, comfort in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty. And I look forward to sharing time with you here in our shared sacred space together today. And so the things we'll do today is we'll do our setting of sacred space like we do every week. And then we'll dive into our topic of the week. And our topic for this week is the power of the exile. The power of the exile, kind of a topic, a very powerful topic, near and dear to my heart. And we'll do it in a slightly different format from what we've been accustomed to. Let me just make sure the feed is working. Okay. And Gowrie, my editor in Bangalore, will be on screen in just a few moments to explain that format, and then we'll dive in. We'll have a bit of an exercise at the end of that discussion, and then we'll close Sacred Space. So now I'll go ahead and start to set Sacred Space for all of us together. And in doing so, I'll start by saying that we would like here together to create a space which is devoid of fear, threat, and control, for us to open to higher guidance from within our own selves, however we define that. It could be our intuition, it could be a muse that we take sort of guidance from, just random flashes of brilliant insight that come to us when we're on a long run, in the shower, or even here when we're in a space that is devoid of fear, threat, and control, a safe sanctuary space for us all to relax and surrender with no danger or feeling of threat, so that we can partake of the emotional nourishment and spiritual nourishment, and even intellectual and intuitive nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. And in opening sacred space today, I will propose, as I do every week, that we all follow the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space. Number 1 is confidentiality. Standard Vegas rules, what happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now that's the rule when we meet in person around the world, when there's not a pandemic. But here, since we're online, the feed is public, the replay will be public, the chat, all this stuff is public. The way we handle confidentiality is via anonymization. So if you would like to be anonymous, you don't have to be anonymous. The way you would do that is to come into the Crowdcast feed, go into your edit profile feature, and then just change your username to Harry Potter, Mickey Mouse, what have you. And then continue chatting and asking questions from there. So that's number 1, confidentiality / anonymization. Number 2 is that in order to maintain the sacred space, we would follow the principle where in this space there is no threat, there is no controlling, regardless of intention. So it's not just kind of mean, malicious threat, but also well-intentioned threat, right? So there's no fixing, there's no intervention, there's no tough love. We are here to hold space for each other, to be however it is we find ourselves, and not to try and come in and fear, threat, and control, even with good intention, to try to improve anyone. We're here to hold space for each other, to be afraid, to be anxious, or to be happy and relaxed. And then however we actually feel about how we feel, we hold space for that as well. So if we're afraid and we're like, well, of course I'm afraid. You'd be a fool not to be afraid in this world right now. We just leave that alone. We just hold space for you. If you're afraid and you feel incompetent that you feel afraid, we hold space for that. If you're happy and you're like, no, I'm happy and I'm happy that I'm happy, that's fine. Or if you're like, I'm happy and I'm guilty that I'm happy, that's fine too. We leave you as you are. We accept you here as you are, and we hold space for that. The third principle is corollary to the above, which is that in sacred space, there is no commerce. So nothing may be sold or recommended or suggested. I can't sell you anything. Gary can't sell you anything. Please don't sell things to each other in the chat. And this includes not just things you sell that, I have this great thing that will help you, but also recommendations we ask you to refrain from. So if you recommend, even if you, with no financial incentive, recommend Artie's great program or whatever, please refrain from doing that. Because even a recommendation is a kind of very well-intentioned, but still a feeling of threat. Because if you're I'm in tough shape, and I say, well, you should read this book. The should is the giveaway, right? Where it's like, the well-intentioned but still threat is that if you don't read this book, you won't get the healing or the pain relief that I believe you so desperately need, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Out in profane space, we'll still send you emails and sell you things, right? But here in sacred space, we refrain for an hour or two a week, right? So we can flex muscles and relax and be in the state that and receive nourishment and share nourishment that you can only get when you're in this non-threat space of sacred space. Said another way, we are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. We are here for what you are, not for what you do or provide. And then the fourth principle is that there is no expectation of participation, right? So there's no pressure to do anything. You don't have to chat. You can chat. You don't have to ask questions. You can ask questions. You don't have to stay for the whole thing. You can come and go as you please. You don't have to pay attention. You can be listening or listening on the replay and playing poker or doing the laundry, right? Whatever you want to do. So again, the idea here is that the nourishment comes from the held space and your presence and attention, but freely given as far as you feel like doing it. In other words, from what you are, not from what you do or provide, not from your competency, not from your validation or emotional labor, and not from your value add of any sort. Okay, we just are here together to be together. And the beauty of shared sacred space is that all of us here together will tend to amplify that effect. So it's almost like we're creating this huge feast of a potluck of emotional and spiritual nourishment. And it becomes more than any single one of us can even gorge on in the space of an hour or two, right? It's and that's kind of where the nourishment and even feeling of abundance comes from. And that feeling itself can be nourishing. So anyway, this is what I proposed. This is what we are about to do. And if you are not okay with that, that's totally okay. We will now give you a moment to just pause so you can make your selection. And if you're not okay with it, you can withdraw from the group. And no worries. We'll still catch up with you later in profane space and still hang out. No worries at all. In other words, there's no fear, threat, or control to whip you into coming to sacred space or staying in sacred space either, because it's sacred space. Okay, so we'll give you a moment now and pause to let you make your selection. Okay, and so for the rest of us who are here, we will now move forward together into our shared sacred space. And as we cross the threshold now together into our shared sacred space, I will just remind everyone that we would ask that we adhere to the 4 principles of sacred space: confidentiality / anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no commerce, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. All right. Happy Sunday. Welcome to Sacred Space, everyone. One of the best parts of my week. I don't know about you. And so let's get to our topic of the week. So our session topic for this week will be the power of the exile. The power of the exile. So in this session, we will explore the mythic figure of the exile and the way we'll do this is we will explore it in one of its most subtle and powerful forms from the Greek tradition, from the ancient sort of classical Greek tradition. And we'll do it in a little bit of a different format. It won't be just sort of one mythic story or fairy tale, but we will look at the figure, in this case, himself. And this is something that Gowrie really sort of, a direction that she's, in her intuition, her muse has kind of taken us in. And I'll let her explain that when she comes on screen in a second or two. But here, the questions we will hope to explore is, what is the experience of the exile? What happens in that period of exile, in that period basically of grief? And then how does return happen? And on what terms does return even happen? Can it fully happen? Okay, so with that, I'll invite Gowrie to come on screen and take us through what she has set up for us.
Yeah,
hey, Gowrie.
Hi.
Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So yeah, we're back to Greek classics over a long time.
We're back to Greek classics.
Yeah.
Finally getting to the dessert portion of the feast.
Yeah. So I mean, I think we started with Greek stories, right, and did revisit them for a long time. And it just came to me when I was thinking. I don't know why I thought of this, but I was thinking about this particular episode between Hera and Hephaestus, and I was thinking, why haven't we talked about this? And I remembered we did have a discussion about Hephaestus some time back, but I don't know, it just didn't come into the LSS picture. So yeah, it was just a flash, and why not, right? So let's do that.
I love it. Okay, should I just hand it over to you and then you take us in?
Yeah, so I'll just give an outline. So this time there's no like a beginning, middle, and end kind of a story, but I'll try to get these various episodes in the life of Hephaestus and see if we can have a narrative, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, right? Cool. Great.
Yeah. Okay. So the thing that we kind of covering today is the god Hephaestus in the Greek tradition, and now we've covered kind of some stories from the epics, the Odyssey and the Iliad as well before, but where you can there's a huge epic, there's a storyline going on, you take an episode from it or a story narrative from it, and we try to read that. When it comes to the gods, it's a little more, how do we put it? It's the mentions of these gods and goddesses are scattered all over Greek literature, and there are just passing references to certain episodes, certain incidents, and it all comes together in a very diverse way. So it's a lot more difficult to kind of weave a story of a particular god, starting middle and to the end. But what fascinated me about Hephaestus is his relationship to Mount Olympus and his parents in general. All right, so there's a bit of uniqueness to Hephaestus in this particular way. So to start off, it begins with, we begin with the birth of Hephaestus and how that is unique, and then go on with his journey of what he becomes. So Hephaestus is the son of Hera. Hera is the queen of the gods, and she's the queen at Mount Olympus. And she's Zeus's wife. Zeus is the king of the gods. He is the god of law and order and justice and sky and lightning. And the story goes, one of the stories says that Hephaestus was born only out of Hera. So Zeus was not particularly his father. Hera gave birth to him alone. And seemingly this was in revenge, because she felt hurt and angry that Zeus had given birth to a daughter, Athena, all by himself, without a mother. So because of this anger and resentment, it is said that Hera went and gave birth to Hephaestus. Now, when Hephaestus was born, it's kind of a unique thing that he was born ugly, and also he had a shriveled foot. So he was also kind of limp, right? And this was disappointing to Hera. I mean, as it is, she had given birth to him out of resentment and anger, but now there was this child, a god, who was ugly. And Greek gods are known to be sort of beautiful and glorious. And this was an exception, right? And, she couldn't come to terms with that. So what she did was she tossed Hephaestus out of Mount Olympus into the sea and abandoned. Hephaestus was thrown off into the sea, and he was found and rescued by sea goddesses Eurynome and Thetis. And he was raised by Thetis and Eurynome on the island of Lemnos, surrounded by the ocean on all sides. And he grew up there under the care of a tribe. And as he grew up, he spent 9 years on this island, and he slowly started to learn to forge metals, started to make jewelry. He first made jewelry for Thetis and Eurynome, and he started to work on this craft. And as he grew up, he also started making different tools, weapons, and beautiful pieces of art. And he made it for the gods as well. And during this time, he fashioned a golden throne. And apparently he resented Hera abandoning him, throwing him out. So that got worked into the golden throne that he made for her. And then when it was done, he sent it across to Mount Olympus. It was a beautiful throne. And Hera, looked at it, admired it, and then decided to sit on it. The moment she sat, this throne had these invisible fetters, which kind of bound Hera as soon as she sat. And she couldn't get herself free. No one could break her free from that throne. She was just trapped in there. So, the gods tried everything they could in their powers to set her free. That didn't work. And then they sent word for Hephaestus, asking him to come to Mount Olympus to free her. And he wouldn't listen to anybody. He just, that's what it is. Deal with it, right? So they tried all things that they could. And finally, Zeus requested Dionysus, who's the god of fertility and the god of wine and vegetation, and is the god of religious madness and ecstasy. So he called Dionysus because Dionysus was the only god that Hephaestus trusted completely. So he asked Dionysus to help them. So Dionysus went into Lemnos, met Hephaestus, talked to him, got him drunk, because that's what Dionysus does. He got him drunk, and then in his drunken state, brought him back to Mount Olympus, and then requested him to free Hera. And Hephaestus decided to do so on one condition. And at some time, Poseidon, the god, the ocean god, had told him that he should negotiate and ask for the most beautiful Aphrodite in return for his, offering of freedom to Hera. So he was all prepared for the condition, for the negotiation. So he told Zeus, I will set Hera free on the condition that I can marry Aphrodite. So of course Zeus was like, well, But he had no choice. He had to give in. And that's how Hephaestus, seemingly an ugly god who didn't fit in Mount Olympus with the other gods, now actually got to marry one of the most beautiful goddesses. And so it went, but Hephaestus continued even after he came back to Mount Olympus. He was, and Dionysus, while this was going on, after he set Hera free, Dionysus negotiated with the gods that Hephaestus belonged to Mount Olympus and he must be given his rightful place. So it turned out that Hephaestus now came back to Mount Olympus for good. And when he came back, he set his workshop in Mount Olympus. He had his furnace and his, forging place where he worked at his metal craft. He fashioned all these beautiful chariots, for Apollo, for Aphrodite, beautiful thrones and beautiful palaces, armors, even for men. He made Achilles' armor, and he came to be known as the god of craftsmanship. So that is how he took a permanent place in the pantheon of the Greek gods, and that was his gift that came out of his being thrown out of Mount Olympus. So that's the archetype that I wanted to narrate today and see how we go with that. Artie, you there? Would you like to come in?
Hello.
Hey, Artie. Hi.
Hi.
So like I said, it's a relatively short kind of narrative because it's not a typical fairy tale or a folk tale.
Yeah.
So we're more kind of doing a character study of Hephaestus in Greek literature. So what do you have to...
Well, first, I just want to say thank you for taking us in this direction. I think it's interesting when we look at a fairy tale because, as we've said in the past, the fairy tale is like a complete diorama of the physics of, some of the transformations we go through as humans in our lives, right? And each fairy tale is like a zoom in bit of detail for that part of, transformation or life phase. And then here, though, what I love about what you're doing here is that we're looking not at the archetype of the exile, because there are millions of different, subversions of that. But we're looking specifically at, one figure. And Hephaestus, of course, is, himself an archetype, right? So it's, you can speak of like the Hephaestian archetype itself. And it's not limited just to being an exile. There are many other sort of aspects to it. But I just love this because then we can go in deeply, build on all the things we've done on the fairy tale side, and see, what else might come from that. So I'll say a few things on Hephaestus, and maybe we can just kick the ball around and see where it takes us. So Hephaestus, for me personally, is, he's very near and dear to my heart, right? Because of all the Olympians, he is the craftsman, right? He is the maker and creator. One way to think about it is his superpower is that he is this kind of introverted craftsperson. He lives in a volcano. Like his Roman name, his Greek name is Hephaestus. His Roman name is Vulcan, from which we get the word volcano. And a volcano, of course, is a well. It is a well of fire. It is a furnace. It is a cooking pot. Those of you who have followed, Live Sacred Space, you may be picking up on the sort of the coded language I'm using here. It is a cauldron, a furnace, a cooking pot of transformation. In other words, a volcano is a vessel of, wait for it, pressure and containment. Right? Two magic words we have used all throughout the series. And Hephaestus is this master worker of transformation. Right? He's literally an armor, a forger, a craftsperson of bringing gold up from the earth and then fashioning it into things that can be used by actors on the stage of the grand sort of world, both deity and mortal alike. But he does so in a very specific way. These masterwork of transformation. He's the only one of the gods who can make these divine objects. Okay, thrones, shields, nets, chariots, armor, all of gold. And in ancient times, the blacksmiths, right, the metal worker, was seen as this kind of almost like witch doctor, right, where it's like, okay, we need this guy because he's making the iron and the bronze objects for which we need our swords and sort of plowshares and all of this other stuff. But the thing he does is a little bit scary. It's a little bit sort of almost this feeling of like dark wizardry. He's like pulling this dark stuff from the earth, sort of firing it in this very sort of secretive way. Because the formulas for smelting everything, even today, are like very closely guarded, right, as trade secrets. And then he comes out with these objects that are like very literally double-edged, right? They can be used for good and for bad. These like pure objects of life force. And, we fear them, but also we can't live without them, which is, the aspect. I mean, you can say that of any major life force, right? So what are the things you kind of fear their power, but you can't live without, right? Life itself, water, food, sex, money, right? Charm, fame, sort of celebrity. These things that are powerful and you might sort of covet, but you also fear, but you also can't like live in a world that's completely has banished that. And in the Hephaestus sort of system, all of these objects he make are out of gold, right? So gold, mythopoetically speaking, is the substance of pure insight. It's not like currency. Money is in the form of coins, and cash is a symbol of ego power. But gold itself, is pure insight, right? Insight into healing, insight into bliss. And over the course of the churning of the series and every one of these sessions, we are pumping the bellows together, right, to come out with these like ingots of gold insight that we take away, that sort of nourish us and guide us in our daily lives. So these are objects of insight, mythopoetically speaking. And so with these objects of golden insight, what do they do for you? So what is a God-fashioned suit of golden armor, right? It is an insight gold that protects you, right? That gives you vision, that makes you see what others can't, right? One of the reasons Achilles, right, in the Iliad, or just in Greek mythology, Aristos Achaion, right, the first of the Achaeans, the best of the Achaeans, the best warrior of his generation, the fastest, everything. People would be like, well, he's invincible. The bullets just bounce off him. And the answer is no. It's because he's actually faster than anyone else. He's like a blur on the battlefield, right? So it is this insight that protects you, that makes you see what others can't. And the connection here is that you can see, it's like in the Matrix, you see the bullets coming in slow motion and you can move out of the way at your leisure. To a normal person, it's like, how did he even do that? I don't even understand. A golden chariot is an insight that helps you travel to places others can't. Where you can go in your mind, you can imagine things. You can do things, on the soccer field, on the battlefield, right, in the business boardroom that other people can't, because you have insight, you have vision that others lack. Now, this is applicable in many realms, but in the healing realm, in the realm that we work in, when I explain something like as a healer, right? So I'm like, maybe you can call me like a Hephaestus sort of healer. In my studio here, I mean, even, when it wasn't pandemic, I was still kind of a hermit, right? Just working on my little sort of online things and online programs, these objects that I would give people that would help them self-heal. In the healing realm, for instance, when I give a certain kind of insight, like when I explain, for instance, in a healing context, what the physical signs of a shame wound are, right? Where it's like shoulders hunched, eyes lowered, afraid of making eye contact, right? Head hanging down, right? That's shame. And then obviously, like when you're like that, you learn pretty quickly in the schoolyard at recess. If you walk around like that, you're going to get your lunch money stolen. So you like come back up, right? But the telltale sign is that it's an overcompensation physically, is that your chin is not level. Your chin is too high, right? And that is what shows your fear, because your armor's up. It's like, mess with me. What are you looking at? What are you looking at, right? That's chin too high. Chin regular is just like regular. Hello, how are you? Nice to see you. And chin down is like, please don't hurt me, right? And because this is not sort of well known, I mean, you just walk around at work in the office, right? Anyone with a chin too high who still is afraid of eye contact. If someone's chin too high and you look him in the eyes, he will start to attack you. Because shame, one of the hallmarks of shame is that it can't bear to be seen, right? It can't bear to be seen. So anyway, when I give an insight like that, right, it is like a Hephaestus piece of armor. You walk around the workplace and it's like you have this X-ray vision. You're looking around and you see the walking wounded everywhere. And it's like, yeah, you can avoid their punches like in slow motion because you can see them coming a mile away. And after a while, they stop messing with you because they can tell, right? They can tell you have this weird light around you that they can tell you can see their wound right there. Right. And all you ever have to do is kind of wave your hand innocently in the direction of their wound. And they're like, okay. Let's just leave this one, move on to the next, soft target. Maybe down the hall, like that guy in the next queue, we'll like go bully him instead. Right. So it's an insight that provides a kind of protection. Right. You see a bully coming a mile away. You know how to avoid this. You know how to sort of retaliate and defend yourself preemptively if you need to. And the bullies sense this and they just kind of, they don't even know how they know. They just know not to mess with you. You're like, not worth the time. So that's a small example from the world of healing. But every world has this kind of capability. And so anyway, Hephaestus is the only god who is able to create objects imbued, containing the power of divine insight. Which is fascinating because all the other gods, for all their powers, they have divine power. But to wield it, they need to be there like basically in person, right? But Hephaestus is the only one who makes this power portable in the form of an object that can be passed down, handed around, given from like generation to generation, which is, archetypally a part of the power of the maker, of the sort of creator. And so for me, it's always been very moving personally to even reflect on the archetype of Hephaestus. And it's just kind of, like a tender, lovely thing for me. So Hephaestus then is this inner masculine, getting back to the story of the birth of Hephaestus. This very sort of deeply honoring story is this inner masculine kind of figure born out of the inner feminine, Hera, but in anger, right? As in sort of she's lashing out against like the patriarchy, the unfairness, the philandering of Zeus, right? And this lashing out is, number one, justified, right? Hephaestus has every right to be alive, right? As an Olympian god. So number one is justified. Number two, it's ugly. And number three, it is crippled in the foot, right? And this to me means the inner masculine power born out of this kind of anger is unable to stand fully on its own, right? The sort of symbolism of your feet in dreams is twofold. It's your ability to stand, is your capacity for independence, your ability to stand on your own 2 feet, and your ability for forward mobility on your life path, on your path in life. Even if you don't have a car, even if you don't have a bike, you can still walk, right? And here, this capability in Hephaestus is literally crippled, right? He is unable to stand on his own and unable to move forward on his own power, symbolically speaking. So you can almost say that when the feminine principle within us, now, again, this is not a sort of sexist or, women shouldn't be angry at the patriarchy. I mean, the anger's fully justified, first of all. But we're not even talking about women and men in the gross aggregate in the outer world. we're talking about your inner masculine and your inner feminine life force within you, which we all have, right, regardless of our outer declared gender. Right, so I identify as a man, right, but I have a very strong, often very sort of insistent inner feminine principle, and a reasonably decent inner masculine principle. But I have both, regardless of my outer gender. So you can almost say that when the inner feminine within us demands protection and manifestation, which is the inner masculine, so she demands and engenders, right, inner masculine protection and manifestation without the full harmony of the inner masculine, without the full integration, because there's a wound there. There's a rift between Zeus and Hera in this case. You do get it in the form of Hephaestus, but there are issues, right? There are issues. And this is the feminine vision within us, right? So for instance, even guys, right, who have a weak inner masculine, for all these kinds of reasons. They see all this toxic masculinity, and as a young boy, they're like, well, I'm not going to do that, right? I'll never hurt you, mommy, right? Like dad did, I will always be there for you. So they suppress their own inner masculine. And they have these grand visions because their inner feminine is very strong. They're visionary, they can do all this stuff. But when it comes time to actually manifest, right, where you need the inner masculine, it doesn't come to fruition. Right, so you have these guys that are like dreamers, castles in the sky, and they can't implement themselves out of a paper bag. Right? And it's not their fault. It's just the imbalance within them. When we do programs on relationships, a lot of the time is spent looking at the inner masculine, inner feminine mix within each person in the relationship. Regardless, I mean, it can be like same-sex relationship. So if it's a man partnered with a man, they both have inner masculine and inner feminine, which leads to some very interesting dynamics. And same set, if it's a woman with a woman and all the other permutations, every single person who's in a relationship brings their inner masculine and inner feminine. I mean, you can call it different names, but it shows up in mythology and dreams as gods and goddesses. So we're just like, okay, let's just roll with it, right? And so this then touches on the physics of this interaction. All the interactions of Zeus and Hera, by the way, inform us of the nature of this interplay, right? The jealousies, the conflicts. It's very sensitive as a topic to discuss, very open to misunderstanding, because whenever we're talking about inner masculine and feminine, it's very easy to just sort of slip and think to yourself, oh, you're talking about men and women. Well, that's not cool. That's not like, So anyway, it's a delicate topic. Maybe someday we'll sort of touch on it more directly, but I don't know that it's going to be here. So when you see these things of like the inner masculine interacting with different aspects of the inner feminine and vice versa, who is with whom, what goddesses reject which gods reject which goddesses are virginal, right? They want nothing to do with men. They stand fully on their own independently. Athena, Athena, Artemis, obviously, and I'm forgetting the next one. Is it? Well, I forgot. Anyway, but there are certain goddesses who are virgins, right? Which means not that they don't have sex per se, but that they are independent of the sort of masculine. They sort of stand on their own, which is hugely powerful and beautiful in its own right, and then creates other sort of dynamics as well, which are like fascinating to look at. This is the beauty and power of the Greek pantheon, because it pulls forward all of these principles from, the Egyptian system, which basically the Greeks got a bunch of their stuff from. And then the Greek stuff was blended with the Roman system, which is more sort of what we're familiar with, right? And then, you see Greek and Roman influence all over, right? In the columns of our courthouses and everything else, in our systems of democracy. So that when we, tap into the Greek pantheon, it's something at the same time familiar, right? And easier to digest, and yet touches on these very deep wells of human civilization and frankly, mythopoetics. So I should say something here about the grief of Hephaestus. So because this inner masculine archetype, Hephaestus, was born out of anger and disharmony, right? He is ugly. They say he's ugly and incapacitated, right? And the inner feminine, upon seeing this, immediately exiles him and throws him off the mountain. And so this aspect of the inner feminine, born like this through no fault of his own, is now in exile. He spends 9 years, the sacred number 9, in grief, surrounded, in the ocean, bathed in an ocean of tears, right? Just like with Neverwash in our previous stories, the Devil's Sooty Brother in the Mythic Healing series, and like Parzival as the exile, even in the Fisher King. He is this exile who spends time out in the wilderness. John the Baptist, right, out in the wilderness. And so seen through the lens of grief, the sea, whose salinity matches the salinity of human tears, the sea is an ocean of tears, mythopoetically. Right? When you look out at the ocean, it's beautiful, it's grand, it's majestic, but it's also scary, right? But it sort of hits this chord of melancholy and recognition, precisely because, right, the sea is an ocean of tears. It's hard to even say that because it touches on this truth that is hard to sort of, fully dive into in a casual manner. But the sea is an ocean of tears because that is how much you cry when you are in full grief. That is how much you cry. It's not just all the water in your body comes out as tears. It's like you continue living and drinking water and eating food, and then more water comes out until you feel this ocean. And this is the thing we have seen symbolically, mythopoetically, in other grief stories, right? When you are down there in grief for 9 years, you also, as a byproduct, right, you learn skills and superpowers, right? In other stories, you learn how to play music. You learn how to speak the language of the birds, right? In other stories that we've told, you learn how to do different things. You acquire these magical powers. And it says something to the recognized kind of pedigree of Hephaestus, that when he is in the ocean, he is cared for by powerful goddesses. So one of the goddesses that cares for him is Thetis, and she herself is the mother of Achilles, right? The one he makes armor for later on during the Trojan War. What he does down there is he generates and acquires the power of craftsmanship, this creator power that no other god has, because no other god has experienced grief in quite the same way Hephaestus has, right? The other gods can give birth to gods and goddesses, right? But none of them can create these objects with that make divine power portable in quite the same way. So this is the superpower that he gains because of the unique depth of his grief, right? Every other god is beautiful, right? And no other god is crippled. It's almost an oxymoron to say a crippled Olympian god. It's like, well, you could just heal yourself. Can't you just wave your magic Olympian god wand and like cure your foot? And the answer is no, because archetypally, this is what you are. And you are a valid sort of fully powered, fully card-carrying part of the pantheon of the Greek gods, which means you are a valid, this exile function, this craftsman function, this function that goes deeply into grief through an exile and rejection through no fault of your own. This is an intrinsic part of the archetypal pantheon of human existence, which is what the Greek pantheon is, which is what any pantheon is. So anyway, there's this deep connection between this power of craftsmanship and the grief of being an exile. Even after he is restored to Olympus, he still remains in exile because he's an introvert. He still lives in the volcano. And he still continues to make things, right? Which means he still continues to live in grief. He hammers, right, the objects and makes them in exactly the same way that the Fisher King fishes, right, to gain insight. In exactly the same way that all these other sort of mythic figures that go down into grief, they still keep their grief habit because it's symbolic of like, even when you come out of grief and you move on with your life, you still carry that grief with you forever, right? When you've had a big loss, you never actually, it's a uniquely Western and kind of adolescent attitude to say, well, how do you just get over it and move on, right? And the answer is you don't, right? It's like that story I often tell about the Dalai Lama. There was this interviewer who was years and years ago asking him about, his friend who died, who was killed. And the Dalai Lama said, yes, yes. And he said, well, how can you tell us how you actually got over that? And the Dalai Lama just like blinked at him and was like, well, what do you mean? It's like, how did you get over it? And when the translator explained, he's like, oh, I never got over it. Why would I get over it? He was my dear friend, right? And the idea is like that once this hole has been ripped in you, why would you, I mean, it hurts like hell, but also in a manner of speaking, this hole in you that is the shape of the person you lost, right? That person-shaped hole is one of the last things you still have of him or her. And, to a certain extent, you live with grief. You don't fill the hole because you love him. You want to keep him around in your life. And if it causes that pain, then it's worth it. He was worth it in life. and why wouldn't he be worth it now? Right? Why wouldn't he be worth it now? In this way, grief is a form of praise, right? Because you only grieve the thing because it was good, right? It was good. And it's an adolescent who says, well, I'm afraid of the pain. I want to get rid of the pain at any cost. And it's I'll just say non-adolescent who says, no, this is going to hurt for the rest of my life. I'm okay with that. It's worth it, right? Like my pain, living with this pain for the rest of my life is a living monument, right, to the greatness of the one that I lost. And I carry it now, and it's painful, and it's worth it, right? So if you ask, how does he heal this then, right? So how does Hephaestus heal this like wound and the shame? The answer is he doesn't, right? He is an archetype. You ask, oh, my inner child, the child archetype. So how does the child archetype grow up? It's like the answer is he doesn't. If the child archetype disappeared, we would not have any more children in our world, right? If you took away the number 3, the archetype of 3, it's like the entire universe would fall apart. So the answer is never. Now, the beauty of being a human and not actually an archetype is that as a human, you can navigate over the course of a golden thread of a human life from one archetype to the next. You can navigate from the girl archetype to the woman archetype, to the mother archetype, to the queen archetype, to the crone archetype. Each archetype itself does not change. They are eternal. Archa means beginning, original, right? Type means form, right? So archetype means first form, the original form. So anyway, the archetype of Hephaestus is of the power of craftsmanship, right? Born out of grief and shame. Right? Just because he starts making these things, he doesn't get any prettier with time, right? And his leg never heals. And yet he is a god of Olympus, which almost increases his shame, right? Because if you're a god of the Olympus and you're the ugliest, so they say, that itself is an oxymoron. How can an Olympian god be crippled and ugly, right? He can make things grow out of stone, but yet nobody can heal him. So that itself is like, you can almost say like, if you could be an Olympian god, but you had to be Hephaestus, would you take that deal, right? And it's fraught. It's fraught. Or you can almost say it like this, that the wounds of exile never quite heal completely, but that a kind of nectar and power still springs forth from it, right? I mean, the fact that he is at least nominally the husband of Aphrodite, right? The ugliest god next to arguably one of the most beautiful goddesses. I don't want to say the most, and I also don't want to not say it because, you remember what happened to Paris. The last guy who was asked to judge the beauty of the goddesses, and that gave rise to the Trojan War. So I don't want to misspeak here. But the Greek worldview, and therefore the Western worldview, is that even among gods, there are wounds that don't heal. There are wounds that do not heal. And it's not that, oh, like we're all new age spiritual people. Okay, fine. There are wounds that don't heal, and that's okay. No. The point is, it's not okay, right? It's that there are wounds that don't heal, period. Right? And so the natural next question is like, okay, so then what are you going to do? Right? Are you going to be outraged? Or that's how we got here in the first place, right? The Hephaestian wound that doesn't heal was born of rage itself. So now that we are a Hephaestus, are we going to do that again? I mean, we could, and many of us do. Or are we going to do something different? And if we're going to do something different, what are we going to do? Hephaestus is a god, right? Remember, he doesn't need to make money or go out and be a contributing member of society. He's a god. He exists for his own sake, right? So he continues crafting, even though he's on Mount Olympus. It's not because somebody said, come on, kid, even though you're crippled, even though people don't like how you look, go ahead and go make something of your life. Anyway, go learn a skill. You can still be a productive citizen. He's a god. He's not subject to those constraints or expectations, but he still crafts anyway. And so that's not why he does it. He crafts as a soothing for his grief in exactly the same way the Fisher King fishes as a soothing for his incurable wound, right? And this is just, even the gods will do this. It's not a morality thing, right? Hephaestus did nothing wrong. He was born like that. And that's why when I talk about these wounds, one of the first things I'll say to a person is that, by the way, let's just be clear, your wounds are not your fault, because nobody chooses to be wounded, right? And yet, here we are. And so, what do you want to do? So, the power of the exile in the archetype of Hephaestus is not in his power to craft per se, right? That to me is a kind of byproduct, right? Especially when we're here in sacred space. We say we're here for what you are, right? Not for the things you bring. And in exactly the same way, the power of the archetype of Hephaestus is not in what he brings. Oh, the armor of Achilles, the chariot of Ares, right? It's not in what he brings, these like gold sparkly things that let me go out and be a hero and slay all these monsters, right? That is seeing Hephaestus with this profane lens. What can you do for me? But to see Hephaestus in the sacred lens is to say that the power of the exile in the archetype of Hephaestus is not in his value add. That's a byproduct. The power is in what he is. What he is. And the power, and to me, what he is that this representation, this archetype of the idea that the power you develop when you are in exile is the power to sit in grief, not as a phase of healing, but as a permanent part of your being, in exactly the way that the Dalai Lama described in that interview. This is the power of Hephaestus. Everyone crowds around his armory to like get their prize or gift to bring, all these gods come and beg favors for him. But he doesn't, create these things for the popularity. He creates them because he's soothing his own wound, because his grief is forever, right? And the stronger the grief, right? The stronger the grief, the more powerful, like all the fruits are, right? It's like when we talk about the Nietzschean phases of life, right? Camel, lion, child. The saying is that, the stronger the load you put on the camel, right, the stronger the lion, because the muscles of the lion have been built up during the camel phase. And I've got a note here from Gary to explain this a little bit more. I think I think I explained this already in the series, but Gary, if even Gary can't find it, then I should probably explain it again. So the Nietzschean sort of phases of life is camel, lion, and child. And the idea here is that in early life, a human is like a camel, obeys, gets down on his knees and says, put a load on me. Okay, and then you put a load on him. He's a student. He's a good son, good daughter. And then he sets out into the desert. This feeling of exile, actually, going out into the desert. And then in the desert, he transforms into a lion, right? And the role of the lion is to do battle. And this is Nietzsche, right? So of course there's a battle between two forces. The role of the lion is to fight the dragon whose name is thou shalt. You should. Finger wagging. You better do this or else. What will the neighbors think and say? And on the scale, on the body of the dragon thou shalt, are these scales. And each scale has a thou shalt, right? Thou shalt honor your mother and your father. Thou shalt do a good corporate job and have a good 401k retirement plan. Blah, 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 blah. And some of these thou shalts are 2,000 years old, right? And some of these thou shalts, were just told to you, by your dad or your uncle, just a couple decades ago. Okay. So the lion fights the dragon, thou shalt, and the bigger load you put on the camel, the stronger the muscles of the lion, so that the stronger you are able to fight the dragon, thou shalt. The longer Hephaestus was in the ocean, grieving and learning, the more powerful his craftsman powers are. At the end of this, just to finish the Nietzschean cycle, the lion successfully kills the dragon, and the dragon, of course, in healing terms, in the healing words we use, are the bully, right? And the bully then, we don't conquer the bully; we transform and recruit the bully, so that the dragon comes fights for us, right? It doesn't suppress us; it protects us. But in Nietzschean terms, that's how we would sort of read that from a prosaic perspective. And then, just to finish it off, the dragon, almost near death, bleeding, wounded, but victorious, limps off, lies, behind a bush in the desert, and then dies and transforms into a child. And the signature, sort of one of the most beautiful parts of this, the signature characteristic of this child phase, is that it is like a wheel rolling out of its own center, spontaneous. In German, Eis an sich rollendes Rad, right? Excuse my accent and pronunciation. So a wheel rolling out of its own center, out of bliss, out of delight. This is the highest phase of life in this Nietzschean system, but not a bad sort of benchmark for us, where you are following your own delight and direction, not as part of a wheel system with an axle and a steering wheel, but a wheel just rolling around from its own delight and direction for no good reason, right? No good reason. Not out of need, the camel, not out of want, the lion, but from pure desire, for delight. And this is the symbol of bliss in the Nietzschean system, the way I read it anyway. So anyway, the thing about going from camel to lion is that the bigger load you put on the camel, the stronger the lion, because the muscles are developed by the initial burden you carry. So there's a power and depth of experience here. And also an experience of the beauty and bittersweetness of life that is experienced in Hephaestus, that is not experienced in the archetypes of, say, Aphrodite or Apollo, right? And all the other golden child gods. There's nothing wrong with any of them, of course. They are archetypes and of different aspects of the experience of living. But Hephaestus is so deeply poignant and moving for me in a way, and not even tragic, but profound, because he gains some of the highest powers because he has experienced some of the deepest griefs. And even as a fully fledged god with all the privileges and everything, he still continues to do his thing. It's like he's found his center. No amount of fame or celebrity will move that, because not because he's a good person or he's moral or whatever, but because the pile was driven that deeply into the bottom of the ocean by the depth of the grief he experienced. And nothing can move that, right? Nothing can move that. And so, let's see. So Gary asked me to say something about the role of Dionysus here as well. And so Dionysus, also, in his own way, near and dear to my heart, right, is popularly known as the god of wine, of inebriation, of partying, of festival. His Roman name is Bacchus, right? So Bacchanalia, so this drunken orgy or whatever. But he is also related to all this. But also he is the god of fertility, of vegetation. So to a certain extent, you can say that all the sort of partying, right, in the end, is order to get things lubricated and going so all this coupling can happen. And then you have this explosion of like life and babies and vegetation everywhere, right? But then, as a sort of meta wrapper to all of that, he is also the god of religious ecstasy. Religious ecstasy. Okay. Which brings you to these altered states, right, where mind and body fuse, and then you like transcend mind and body. To see, I mean, what do you see in a state of religious ecstasy? In some sense, you can almost say that what you see is the world in its archetypal form, right, where you see the patterns everywhere of the underlying structure of what's going on. That's why people, when go on these trips, like LSD trips or ayahuasca journeys or whatever, they'll start to see like what there are no words, right? But what they will describe as like sacred geometry, or an angel will come to them and just lay everything out, and you like have full comprehension, but you can't come back and write it in a book. It's like the words we use on this level of existence just are not up to the task of describing the things you see at the archetypal level. So that's what you see in a state of religious ecstasy. And in ancient times, wine, among other things, was used as a kind of hallucinogen to achieve these altered states of consciousness. I mean, it can still be used for that now. It's just we kind of dismiss the visions we see when we've had too much wine, because it's been sort of downgraded to this like profane thing of just like numbing yourself out instead of bringing you to this higher state, right? So in ancient times, it was more used in religious ceremonies as a kind of like, marijuana or peyote or ayahuasca would be used today. And so for Hephaestus, who is locked in a lifelong stalemate of grief, shame, and tragedy, okay, out of which he creates his artisanal stuff, almost like he's almost partly this archetype of the suffering artist, right? Who is like, the thing that you all read and sort of like, book critics are so harsh about. That's me bleeding on the page, right? But when the muse it infuses me with her flow, right? The mundane details of my life story that I talk about in my memoir, right? It's that next state of muse inspiration, going deep enough down into the grief where you see the archetypal religious ecstasy view of even your own life, and you're able to talk about it in this more transcendent, larger narrative, which is why, like people write memoirs about like going through all this horrible stuff in their childhood, right? And some just read like these diary entries, and others read like these grand epic narratives, right? And the difference is this lens of what we're referring to as this archetypal lens of religious ecstasy. No matter how you get to it, when you're sleeping and you have dreams, I mean, that's equivalent, right? You didn't have to take any drugs, you just needed a good night's sleep. So this aspect of Dionysus starts to touch the jugular of that a little bit. Because when Dionysus gets him drunk, it's not trickery, right? Because, you think about like what we know about the grief of Hephaestus. If you get a guy like that drunk just for trickery just to sign a contract, it probably more 80-20 will fail, right? He'll probably be a pretty mean, nasty drunk. He's not going to do anything. He's definitely not going to let his mother free from the throne. So if our intention were to trick him, we would not send Dionysus. We would send Hermes. Hermes is the trickster, thief, rogue, cattle rustler god, right? Smooth talker, can sell ice to Eskimos, all that. So if that were our intention, we would send Hermes. If we wanted to harangue him and argue and negotiate lawyerly, well, this is what should happen, we would send Apollo, right? The golden child, solar god of law and order. And the point in the story is we already tried all that. We sent everyone else and nothing worked. And the last thing we try is to send Dionysus, who is not there to trick him or to guilt him, but who gets him drunk and gives Hephaestus this transcendent level of religious ecstasy, where you kind of, in this state, you almost are able to look down at yourself in chains, in prison, but you see the larger pattern of your life and you say, oh, right? And it's this very subtle connection in the story where they say, and they don't have to say this, they explicitly say, Dionysus, who was the only god Hephaestus completely trusted. And this is why. This is why. Who can bring the deeply grieving Hephaestus to this higher level, to see the overall pattern, not to say this is good or bad, right? But you see the Hephaestus pattern as an archetype, right? Religious ecstasy is related to Joycean aesthetic arrest, what we talked about in the sort of artist archetype, the sacred and profane in art and beauty session from many months ago. When you are able to see something in its elemental form, it puts you in a state of aesthetic arrest. This is the job of a proper artist, a non-pornographic, non-didactic, a proper artist, right? Who creates what Joyce would call proper art, not improper art, to put you in a state of aesthetic arrest. When you're on your ayahuasca journey and you see sacred geometry, right? One of the things that's so stunning is that you are put into the state of aesthetic arrest. And your reaction to it is not, oh, this is interesting, maybe we could use this in our thing next week in our project. It's like there's no profane fear, threat, or control here. Your reaction to it is simply, like, whoa. It's like this reaction of wonder, this awestruckness of wonder, which we would also call aesthetic arrest. It's like that movie from the 90s, Pulp Fiction. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but there's a classic line in the final diner scene between Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta, which, by the way, for those of you who have done healing with me, there have been a couple retreats in 2019, pre-COVID, where I actually showed that clip at the end of the retreat as an optional thing, as the quintessential modern fairy tale version of the conversation between the lost board member, the exile, and the bully, right? And in this, Samuel L. Jackson, right, Jules, would be the one who is contemplating going into exile, right? The sensitive, vulnerable, the lost board member, and John Travolta is the bully. And at one point, he says to John Travolta, Jules says to John Travolta, because they're arguing, it's like, I can't believe you're just going to be a bum, fear, threat, and control. You can't do that. You're going to leave the life of the gangster. And he said, I had what some alcoholics refer to as a moment of clarity. And that is Dionysus and religious ecstasy and viewing the world, all of reality, through the lens of archetypal clarity. And you have your moment of clarity, right? All this stuff is going on. My life is in a shambles. I have all these emotional wounds. Now I'm soothing with alcohol. So adding shame on shame on shame, right? Adding an addiction for which I could die. And it's shaming me in my current world, like giving my kids additional trauma and hardship, and all of this on top of the trauma that I was, the hand I was dealt with, like Hephaestus, through no fault of my own, right? I didn't ask to have like an abusive, parent or whatever. And then I do this alcohol thing to soothe, and it drives me deeper and deeper into shame and grief. And in the middle of this, at the bottom of the ocean, right, for 9 years, you have this moment of clarity. You can't put it into words. It just makes complete sense. And your reaction is, whoa, right? And what happens from there, I mean, who knows? Some people get conviction and, they hurt themselves. Some people get conviction and they never drink another drop and they move forward. But it is sort of describing not a prescription for fixing anything, mind you, right? Especially here in sacred space, we're not trying to fix anything. We're just describing a state of affairs that is so, right? So you might say, so this religious ecstasy, this like higher vision, what even good is that for? And I say, I have no idea, right? I'm not offering a formula to cure anything, especially not medically, right? I'm simply explaining a state of affairs that is so. This is what happens in sacred space. Not that you must go out and do this and this, but that isn't this how life is? Right? And what we do here every Sunday in sacred space is, a bit tame. It's not quite religious ecstasy. We're not like giving you concoctions to drink and having like wild orgies, so it's a bit tame by comparison, but it does carry a bit of the same flavor because we come in, we like agree to these sort of principles, to not threaten each other, to not try to control each other, and then we just kind of frolic for a bit, and then we go our separate ways. And somehow, strangely, it is nourishing for everyone involved, from myself included. Okay, so I have a question here that Gary asked me to address, which is what to make of the similarities and common patterns between Hephaestus and these other stories, grief stories that we see like in Neverwash and in Glass Hill, right? The Cinder Lad kind of story. And so one distinction here to make is that with fairy tales, we see characters go through transformation, right? There's a protagonist and there's a kind of diorama of phases. So the protagonist is archetypal, but also they move through different archetypes. Like this is the physics of what happens when you have a transformation, when you're presented with twins or two choices, a crossroads, left or right. Let's see what happens on the left. Let's see what happens on the right. And we don't tell you what to do. It's not allegorical, but we're like, in a situation like this, these are some of the choices you have. Right, here's the map, and you navigate it however you wish. The power of the Greek pantheon, though, is that there is no arrow of time. Right, and this relates to something we said in last week's session on the nature of sacred and profane in time. One of the superpowers of the Greek pantheon is that there is no arrow of time. In the Greek pantheon, time is not an arrow, it's a circle, right? The baby Hermes is always a baby and a grown-up at the same time, right? In exactly the same way, Hephaestus is always crippled and he is always an introvert, right? He doesn't heal and then show up at, the Olympian cocktail parties all like bright and sparkly and, hey guys, this is the new me, right? He is always the way he is. His character never changes because he's not human, he's archetypal. This is the enduring, eternal power of the Greek pantheon. They use these elemental archetypes to depict a principle. And with these static archetypes, you are able to show these elements and aspects of human life and existence that are both static and also dynamic and subtle at the same time, right? So the Greeks, of course, are famous for their depictions of tragedy. And this is exactly why, right? The pantheon and the way it's set up is exactly why Greek art and plays and drama can bring out the flavor of tragedy so beautifully, because it is an elemental truth. When you think through the tragedy, right, displayed in all of its monstrous form, you have this moment of clarity. Right? The nature of tragedy is that again, it's not allegorical. It's like, well, you shouldn't have done this, and because you did this, then you got punished. It's rather symbolic and archetypal, right? Where this tragic, monstrous thing happened. And when you see how it unfolded, you realize there was no way it could have been avoided, right? I mean, in the Iliad, in the Trojan War, if you were in Hector's role, pious first son of Priam, right? Following, beloved by all the gods, but it's like given that he's going to die this like ignoble death. And he does everything right. If he tried to avoid it, it would be even worse, right? Or you look at Achilles' role, right, in Homer's Iliad, right? And you follow the path of Achilles through Patroclus and the slaying of Hector and everything. It is monstrously tragic what has happened, but at the same time, the depth of the tragedy is because if you were in their shoes, you would do no different. That's tragedy. You see the train wreck coming, and you would do nothing that's different. There is no non-angry Hera. There's no non-philanderer Zeus. And it is a thing that is never healed, never cured, right? And this god, Hephaestus, who is pushed to the limit, right, of this tragic dynamic, when pushed absolutely to the limit, he starts fruiting out these divine objects that the world can use, not because he's particularly happy with the world. If anything, he's the most angry person. But out of the suffering comes these things. And so, like I said earlier, the eternal question is, even though you have the power of these objects, if you knew they came out of this monstrous, tragic suffering of a figure like Hephaestus, would you still use them? Right? Well, it is what it is. Right? The archetype is what moves you. We all, and the deeper point here is that we all have a Hephaestus within us. We all have a golden boy Apollo. We all have an angry Hera. We all have a philandering Zeus. We all have a tricky Hermes, right? And we all have a sort of shamanistic, sort of luring, drug dealing kind of Dionysus. And now when we do healing, right, for the Hephaestus within us, one of the things we do is we look for the exile, right? Who is the thing within us that has been exiled? And often there are many. People are like, well, where do I even start? I've pushed down so many parts of me. How do I even start? So it feels overwhelming. And so what we always say when we do healing is that, okay, we're not looking for all the exiles, right? We're just looking for, let us call her the queen of the pirates, right? We're not going to talk to all the workers. We're just going to talk to the union leader, right? And then you work it out with her, and the rest of them will then come along too. And you still meet with them individually as we circumambulate and go through, but we're just looking for the sort of archetypal exile. And the beautiful thing about being a human and then working with these archetypes for our own healing is that one of our powers as humans, as mortals, right, is that we are not eternal, right? We do die, which means that we are not archetypes. We are humans. So when we find the Hephaestus element within us, we can bring it in, right? And when we recover him, right, we bring him to our own inner Mount Olympus. There's an explosion of power within us. We have this power that is recovered that we didn't have before. That's healing. That's not curing. Curing is like, Hephaestus, stop making trouble, shut up. We'll send you monthly payments. Here's some pills you can take. Just like, don't rock the boat. That's curing, right? Control, threat, force. Healing is like, look, I don't care what the neighbors say. I don't care if I lose my job. I don't care if nobody loves me. This is my child, and I claim him, right? And you bring him back, right? And the question of healing is the question of, how do we address this grievance within us, this Hephaestian element within us? How do we reconcile with it? Right? And ideally not by curing symptoms and keeping him quiet, but by healing the emotional wounds, right? That's why when I say as a healer, right, nothing I do is medical. I'm not here to cure you. I kind of say that with a little pride, right? Because I'm not here to make the symptoms go away, right? I'm not here to sort of like, patch you up, slap you on the ass and say, get back out there on the football field and keep scoring touchdowns for us, right? That's not my role, right? I'm here to try and decode what is the message. I'm here to help you ask the question, the healing question of like, what the hell is even going on here? Or you have a fact pattern of symptoms, you have all this stuff, and I don't read it allegorically. It's like, well, maybe you should drink less. It's like, why are you drinking in the first place? Right? It's like, oh, it's just genetics. And it's like, it can't just be genetics. Right? Your brother doesn't drink, and like this thing happened to you that didn't happen to any of the other kids. So it's like, but nobody wants to talk about that. Right? So it's like mythopoetically speaking, what is the code of the messages that are coming to us through our body symptoms, through the dreams that we're having, through the conflicts that we have in our outer lives? That seem cliche when we dismiss them, but when we look at them, it's like, no, this is actually like a unique fingerprint. No one quite has this issue in the way that I have this issue with my brother or my wife or whatever, right? What is the mythopoetic insight that comes from looking at the thing that is going on in your life so that we can guide you to self-heal? Right? The crux in the way we do healing here is basically the recovery of these inner exiles. Why is Hephaestus angry? Why is the volcano exploding again? Are we just going to look for a bigger lid to clamp down on the lid, on the opening of the volcano? Or are we willing, which is terrifying, we can get burned? Or are we willing to go down into the bowels of the volcano to see who is down here, what he's doing, how he's feeling, and what does he need from us? So for me, in a healing context, this question of the exile is the key to everything, right? That is the crux of the healing process. So I think that's the main notes that I had. Gary, do you want to come back up and see if there's anything else we should cover? Hi.
Yeah, I mean, this is just so powerful in terms of covering grief and exile. We've covered that in many stories before, but the amazing insight for me is that in other fairy tales, because they cover, at least the way we've read it, they talk about circumambulation and as the mechanics of the healing or the phases through which you go. And also the goal seems to be the integration, reconciliation between the various aspects, which is the inner masculine and the feminine. And I was always puzzled by the fact that in these Greek archetypes, you don't see much of that physics coming through. You don't see the reconciliation.
Right, the happily ever after, right?
So, like you see in fairy tales, right? I mean, here there's the tension between Hera and Hephaestus. I mean, it's not really resolved, but there's an agreement that Hephaestus will not bother Hera anymore, and Hera will not throw him off Mount Olympus anymore. So there's just a kind of a standoff, but
I'm back in my mother's house, but the only way I got here was not because she welcomed me back.
Yeah. So
because I had to go through a court of law.
Yeah, because I had someone kind of back me up and advocate for my restoring my position. So kind of and it's very insightful to hear you say that, because these are archetypes and not really fairy tales per se. It is what it is, and then you kind of look for those patterns. When you see a pattern like that, you understand what the dynamics are. So if I see it in a Hephaestus, I know that between that archetype and another archetype, there's always going to be this kind of relationship, and that's how it is. But then how do I restore his rightful place? And that's really powerful, the way I look at it, because give me religious ecstasy and give me a volcano where I can forge things, beautiful things, and I think I'm good. Right? I mean, if that's what he's saying, then I'm reminded of the story of Buddha, and I think we've discussed this several times, where Gotami comes to Buddha because she's in grief, she's lost her child, and she wants Buddha with his powers to revive the child and bring it back to life. And she simply just cannot come to terms with the fact that her child is dead. So she actually carries her baby to Buddha and will not listen to anything that Buddha says, except for, I just need you to bring him back to life. And Gautama Buddha says, well, let me do that. I mean, he realizes he can't reason with her. So he says, okay, let me do that. But first, you must do this. You must get me some mustard seeds from a house which has not seen death. Do that for me, I'll be able to kind of perform some magic spells or whatever. And then we'll go from there. And instantly she starts running to every house and every street that she can go to, knocks on the door, asks the lady of the house when she opens it, can I have some mustard seeds from your house? I need it. And then she says, but first, have you seen death in this house? The answer she gets in every house is, yes, we have. She can't find a single house that has not seen death. I mean, by the end of it, she realizes what Buddha was trying to tell her. There's simply no way around this, right? Kind of reminded of that when you talked about Hephaestus's grief, and I mean, he kind of, right from the beginning of Hephaestus's situation, I think he's already come to terms with the fact that there is no going around this. I'm never going to get better. I'm never going to look like an Olympian god. I'm never going to be accepted by my mother. And then this is just how it is. He just pushes through his anger and resentment, and then gradually moves into that space where, where his craft is everything. So it's so powerful that to see there's an archetype that completely covers that aspect of acceptance of grief and the flow of bliss out of him in that one archetype itself. So yeah, so that's how I feel about that.
I mean, it's interesting because, if you read that story that you just told of the mustard seeds, I mean, I remember that story, and the classic way that I read it was that, well, it's just an upaya, like a cunning gambit for him to get her to remember that, like, well, death is unavoidable in our world, right? And I still read it like that. But, when we're talking about archetypes and the level of religious ecstasy, looking at the world through the lens of archetype and seeing the archetypes everywhere, I don't know. It's this other feeling I had about the mustard seed story where, like, I could imagine her finding a house that had not seen death. Right? It just wouldn't be in this state. Like, if she'd gone into religious ecstasy, right, she would be maybe on like a different plane, and she'd find the mustard seeds, but then she wouldn't be able to bring them back here. And then she would maybe see her son up over in that plane, right? And so, because like people have typically read the mustard seed story as almost depressing, it's like, well, even the Buddha can't help. So, and all he does is like turn you around in the maze to like remember, look in the mirror and say, like, we're all screwed anyway. So, oh well, I guess life is suffering. And I'm like, and it's valid to read it like that. It's kind of like a little bit depressing, right? Well, we're all screwed. We're all going to die. Even the Buddha died. Yeah. And it's like, that's not, I mean, it's fine to read it at that level because that's all you know, and you can't, but there is this other sort of level of reading it, which is, no, there is a way to get the mustard seed. But you have to leave the confines of the game as we have it right now. And if you want to leave the confines, that's fine. But once you leave, then you were never a mother to begin with, right? You never had a son. And is that okay? Right? Like, one way to get over the grief of, a mother who's lost her son is to just go into this other realm of consciousness where you were never a mother to be, you're not even human anymore. Right? It's like when we talk about like the Monopoly game, right? If you're really getting crushed in Monopoly, right, what does a child do? Like, gets up and just throws the whole thing on the floor. Gets punished, sent to his room without dinner or whatever, right? But it's like the archetype we're in is what it is. Right? And you cannot in this setup find mustard seeds from a house that has not seen death. Right? But that's not a reason to be depressed. It's just showing you that this is the framework we're in. You can leave it if you want. But if you don't leave, that's your choice. And if you choose to stay, the really delicious question is like, why do you stay? Why do you stay? Yeah. It's like you're getting crushed. You are going to lose this game of Monopoly. Okay, well, I've got like 6 hotels. I've like got you trapped. And yet I'm like, well, do you want to just stop? We'll get a pizza. We don't have to play anymore. You go, no, I want to keep playing. And it's almost inexplicable. There's something about this where it's like, I still enjoy being here. Yeah. And especially in situations of loss, it's like, I have this hole ripped in me. And the shape of the hole is in the shape of the person I lost. And if you give me a numbing agent where none of this ever happened, right, I still would not prefer that. Because even having a hole in the shape of the person I lost is better than never having known him in the first place. That's why I stay. And it's painful. And it's like, yeah, it's okay. I mean, when you play Monopoly, you're going to land on a square where you're going to have to cough up a lot of rent every now and then. Forever. Forever. There is no God mode cheat code in Monopoly where you just like never pay rent. Right? And even in video games where you play, you look up online, what's the cheat code? So you have unlimited ammunition, unlimited money. You can go around, you're invincible. How long do you play God mode for those of you who game? You play about 10 minutes and then it's boring and then you move on to the next thing. Right? If you stay, there is a reason you stay, and that's okay. Right? Staying to grieve the person you lost is like, it's a form of praise and honor. And it's not wrong to praise and honor and grieve for the one you lost, because what you're saying is the truth, which is the one I lost was good. Right? And worth it. And worth it. There's one other aspect here. What did you want to say?
Yeah, please go on. That's nothing.
Okay. There's one other aspect of Hephaestus that I was reminded of yesterday that came out when you were describing it. I'm not going to go into the whole thing of like metallurgy and alchemy and all that stuff, other than to say that in metalworking culture, the world over, okay, there is this archetype of metal, ingots of metal, being, when you read the ancient texts of like alchemy and like all Sumerian, Babylonian, sort of when they first learned how to do these things, the image is all around like sort of this ore as a kind of embryo in the womb of the earth. And that a metal worker, right, is a midwife that helps the earth, because these things will naturally be born out of the earth and will just, sit there in a gold, like just sitting glittering in a stream, right? minding its own business. But it's like a metal worker accelerates these natural processes of nature. And this is sort of worldview that, like, the role of the human sort of being, the human archetype, is to be this sort of gardener, right? This sort of facilitator, this what's the word I'm looking for? Custodian of the already natural processes of nature, and then to help them along, to midwife them, to be a midwife to Mother Nature. Now, in that view, when you look at the world we've created now, we've gone a bit, astray from that path. But the original sort of look was that, and this idea of Hephaestus then being this midwife of the ore, a midwife of insight itself, right? Where he brings the gold up and fashions it into these sort of objects that provoke insight. And what's interesting is that there's a part of me that's Hephaestian, obviously. And then here, when the two of us, right? I mean, your surname, I won't say your surname online, but basically means like healer, right? In Sanskrit, which is so interesting. And this idea that the two of us come together here and we talk about this Hephaestian archetype, and even the archetype itself, we are mining for like all of this fantastic insight. I mean, for everyone, but also for ourselves. Every time we read one of these things, we're both like, whoa, that's cool. And when it reaches a certain level of quality, we're like, oh yeah, this is actually good enough for like an LSS session. So this idea of metal as being this like embryo to be birthed from the earth, and part of our role is like to help that. I mean, it went to this. I mean, in like Sumerian, Babylonian texts, sort of ancient, like 5,000-10,000 years ago, evidence of like human sacrifice rituals, where they would perform some form of human sacrifice to sort of sanctify a metalworking kind of forge, because they're like trying to draw out the fetus like of the earth, right? The sort of birthing of the earth, and giving a human in exchange to sort of get that thing going. So really quite literal in very, very, very ancient times. But just very interesting when we talk about the Hephaestus sort of archetype. Yeah.
And the other interesting thing that I found is that, again, I find that this narrative of Hephaestus has a lot of similarity to, the story we did in the session called "What Comes After Grief," where we talked about the Norwegian story, the princess on the glass hill, right? And have our hero Boots sit there in the barn, and his two brothers bullying him, saying he's good for nothing. And yet he's the one who, in round 1, 2, and 3 earns these horses and their bridles and everything, and kind of he also earns some kind of magical abilities and powers, which then,
of course,
later he goes and participates in this contest to win these golden apples and ultimately the princess, right? So there's a whole cycle that takes him on the path of moving up and up and up until he kind of finally gets the princess. There, what we read there was, through his entire period of grief and grief, and what comes after that is these magical abilities and earning of these golden apples one by one until he finally gets there. And the kind of contrast I see in the Hephaestan archetype is that Hephaestus creates these golden apples. Now, he doesn't get them from somewhere. He's the one who makes these things, which is the most amazing, like the wow thing about this. As he doesn't sit and wait for some golden horse with a golden bridle to come to him. He's just sitting there forging it.
Yeah, so he's making them. And it's also like the part of this, that Cinder Lad story where after he gets the last golden apple, he goes back and sits in the ashes. He goes back to his volcano.
Yeah.
Because grief, even for him, is not a phase to be done with. It's like, dude, this is where I live.
Yeah, this is my home.
And if you don't like it, like your displeasure or shaming of where I live is like the least of what I've experienced in my life. You can go hang, right? This is where I live.
So that's kind of really spectacular and amazing about kind of looking at the contrast of these stories and thinking, wow, I mean, Hephaestus actually, I mean, there's a part where, Hephaestus, after he goes back to Mount Olympus and sets up his workshop, he actually creates these golden maidens to assist him with the metallurgical work. They are his assistants. So he goes about, creating these wonderful, wonderful objects of, magic. Even as he's going through, it's not like, okay, all of this power to him comes after his cycle of grief. It's like grief is what kind of takes him through this entire journey of craftsmanship. So that's amazing to have that insight.
Totally. Oh, I love it. Thank you.
So what do you recommend for this week's reflections?
Okay, so let's do that. So for the exercise this week, let me just pull up my notes here. So for those of you who are new to live sacred space, again, principle number 4, no expectation of participation. We just like to suggest a little fun exercise for you to do reflection, but you do it only if you want. Only if you want. No pressure. But if you wanted to do it, like the way you would do it is you would find some time alone this week before the next session, 5 or 10 minutes at home, or if your home's really sort of like a mess, noisy, let's say when you're driving to get some groceries, right? You park the car, and before you go into the grocery store, you sit an extra 5 or 10 minutes. No one will miss you. And then you take out your pen and paper, you reflect on this question, and you just barf out, you just write whatever comes to you. And the reflection questions for this week based on this story are to reflect on the question, what is your own inner exile? Right? What is your own inner exile? Now, the trick is you ask this question not as the victim, not as, oh, I'm poor Hephaestus, poor me, the whole world has rejected me, and my actual mom was like that. No, not quite like, you can do that. But the twist here would be to ask the question, what is your inner exile? Where you are not Hephaestus. Hephaestus may be a part of you, but you are in the role of Hera. In other words, what part of you has been born out of your own anger and frustration? Now, mind you, your own not unreasonable, fully valid, and justified anger and frustration. What part of you has been created out of your own justified anger and frustration that has then come out of you and which you have then gone ahead and thrown off and suppressed because it was embarrassing to you? And where is that part of you now? And what does it want from you? How has it tied you to your throne? And mind you, tying Hera to her throne, she is the inner feminine. And the powers of the inner feminine are both the holder of vision in your life and nourishing and nourishment. Nurturing. So how has it tied you to your throne and limited your powers of vision and nurturing? And in the healing context, we would ask the question, given the state of affairs, what will it actually take to reconcile with it? What will it take to reconcile with it? So yeah, I think that would be the exercise for this week. Only if you want. Only if you want.
Thank you for that. Thank you. And yeah, so let me go back to the background while you close the session.
Okay. Yeah, what time is it? Okay, yeah. So let's we'll go ahead and close Sacred Space. So our next session is next Sunday. It'll be our 50th session, and I'll just drop the link here and also in Facebook. So it's free, open to the public. Come and go as you please. Send the link to friends if you want, and we hope to see you there. And in closing the session for this week, I will say that I hereby close the session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and with us. And thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, and the spiritual nourishment that comes in from this shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you all in the next session. Thank you.